Snap Studios. Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. When you use Apple Card on your iPhone, you'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple, like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Apply now in the Wallet app on your iPhone. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch, terms and more at applecard.com. Snap Nation, I am so humbled and thrilled because what you are about to hear is a project years in the making. Snap Studios' brand new series, Fire Escape, explores the story of one woman, Amika Mota, and the aftermath of her biggest mistake. Perhaps the biggest mistake it's possible to make. And we also follow her journey to seize back her own humanity in her own eyes and through the eyes of the people she cares about. Made in partnership with Wondery, Snap producer Anna Sussman leads us through this new 10-part series into the world of incarcerated female firefighters. And our real-life story includes mentions of a car crash and the aftermath. This is Fire Escape, Episode 1, The Crash.
Okay, let's start with, tell me everything you remember about your first call.
It was fall during the really foggy season, and so the fog was really, really heavy. And so, in the fire engine on the way to the call, we could hardly see. The fog was so thick. And we had heard that that there was a cotton truck involved. It was like a 4-lane highway, and it was a cotton truck that had been rear-ended by somebody else and kind of spun out, and the cotton bales fell off onto the freeway.
911, what's your emergency?
The call came in to Madera County Station 5. It sits in the flatlands of California's Central Valley, lined with rows and rows of aging almond trees. The firefighters at Station 5 were the closest to the scene.
The routine is the call comes in over dispatch, and you get suited and booted real quick, so you get your full turnout gear on. It's your real heavy gear, and then we all jump in the engine. And I was nervous. It was my first, car accident. And I know the captains and the chief were a little bit nervous about me coming to the scene, too.
Driving down the highway, Amika and the other women on the engine were quiet, lined up, 4 on each side of the truck, knees touching in the middle, with their helmets on their laps. The equipment on the engine was rattling, and they strained to hear the information over the radio. From what they heard, it was a very fragile scene.
I was just talking to God, like, please let me be able to handle this. Please give me the strength to maintain some composure.
And did you have the feeling of, feeling eyes on you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were definitely, checking in with me on the way. And I remember Chief looking at me at one point, and he's like, honey, you look like a deer in the headlights. We roll on scene, and I can see a man's head, and he already had that look of death, which is just that color, the shade of gray to his face. My heart is pounding at this point. It's like, okay, I don't know what else I'm going to see.
The other fire stations around the town were also called, and their fire crews were starting to show up.
There's other engines on scene that have rolled up now, and firefighters that have been on the job for 20 years. And this was such a bad scene that there was a couple of the firefighters the old head experienced firefighters that were sick on the side of the road, literally sick. And so we're watching them. But our job as the first engine on scene and as the girls that do the dirty work is pulling the bodies. That's our job. So I approach with the captains and the other firefighters. And I can see in the back seat 2 more bodies. I'm praying because I don't know what to do to kind of else. I feel like we have to keep some reverence to this moment too, because it's so intense. It's this whole family that has passed.
Amika and the other firefighters cut open the car. Inside was a family of 3, all adults. Carefully, they removed their bodies and placed them on the grass and covered them with yellow sheets.
I wasn't prepared for that being the beginning of my experience at the firehouse. And so at that point, it was like I'm a baby firefighter. And my first car accident was a triple fatality. We don't quite know how to take care of ourselves. We don't quite know how to get home and tell the other crew about what we just saw. It's just kind of a really silent ride home.
The place Amika and the other firefighters call home is actually inside a prison. It's called Madera County Station 5 CCWF. And it's a little brick firehouse with 2 engines and a handful of rolled hoses, a bunk room with 12 neatly made cots, a little open kitchen, and a captain's office. And there, 12 incarcerated women train and work out, wash fire trucks, and go to sleep, all inside the barbed wire fence of one of the largest women's prisons in the world, the Central California Women's Facility, CCWF.
We're firefighters, but we're incarcerated, and we lived with correctional officers still. We were not free. And our view into the prison gates reminded us of that, like, every day. You know what I mean? We couldn't look outside without seeing the towers and the barbed wire.
Is there a moment when they kind of lock you in?
Yeah, so count time, we get counted the same as everybody else on the inside. And so count time is when the sergeant comes through and everybody needs to be on their bunk and accounted for, basically.
What was your number?
X32168.
From Wondery and Snap Studios at KQED, I'm Anna Sussman, and this is Fire Escape, the story of a woman whose world burned down, and then she learned to fight fire from behind bars. This is episode 1, The Crash. There were nearly 2,000 women locked inside the Central California Women's Facility at the time Amika entered. Women at all custody levels. Women serving sentences for crimes ranging from embezzlement to homicide to possession of drugs. And when I first began interviewing women here, about 20 years ago, they would each always tell me the same thing, about the shame they endured as women prisoners. They had let down their families, their parents, their children. They felt they had failed as women. It's something corrections officers taunt them about, something their kids, friends, parents make comments about. I remember interviewing a woman under the shadow of the high prison wall and her saying casually, "We're women, we're not supposed to commit crimes. We're not supposed to be here." And that comment meant so many things about women who are convicted of crimes and in prison, and what everyone thinks of them forever. When I first met Amika, It was clear she was very aware of this narrative.
You broke the social contract with the whole world when you went to prison and left your kids. Like, that is the most real thing ever. Like, once you break this social contract, that's it. Like, that's just how it's perceived, right? From the world and by us when we internalize this. And regardless of all of the ways they feel about me, it's like, there's no going back. There's none. I can only move forward.
When Amika talked about the calls she responded to as an incarcerated first responder, it seemed hers was a story of defying a system intent on burying her under the weight of her worst moment. Out on the fire trucks, Amika and the other women are basically heroes, pulling children out of crumpled cars, climbing into burning homes with a hose and an axe, picking up elderly folks who had fallen in their kitchens, saving the lives of their jailers and their families. When they ride past schoolyards with fire truck lights spinning, kids cheer. And then they drive into the prison gates. Before Amika was inmate X32168, she lived in the mountains of Kern County, California, in a 3-bedroom house.
The front thing was a whole porch all the way around the front, like a wraparound porch. Yeah, it was really beautiful. I loved that house. It was kind of a dream house.
Amika was 29 years old and she had 3 kids. And she had just moved to the countryside to try to slow down and focus on her kids and focus on being a mom.
Yeah, so Tehachapi is just these high desert mountains, a lot of rolling hills, really beautiful. You can see the shadows on the hills from the clouds.
She'd walk her older kids to the school bus every morning, and on weekends, they'd go hunt for snakes or go to her son's football games.
I had big dreams of, like, taking care of the home and having a garden and having nice meals, and I tried. I liked the idea of it. I did. I had idealized the idea of living in a small town, taking care of my kids, taking care of my house.
And then, on a warm night in October 2008, driving down Lincoln Avenue in Cypress, California, everything changed.
I do remember approaching the light that I ran and like seeing the light. I don't remember if I saw it red, but I was going to burn through it. And I didn't see any other vehicles. And then that was when I hit Mr. car. It's like glimpses. I remember glimpses of coming into the hospital and like waking up in between the surgery and like seeing, I remember the families I would see in the hallway, and I remembered waking up, and that's like handcuffed to the bed. So there was sheriff deputies on, one side of the bed and outside the door. So you could see 2 outside the door and 1 right next to me. And he let me know that I was under arrest and that I had killed somebody in this accident. And I didn't believe him. Like I remember it just didn't register. None of it felt real. It didn't feel true. It didn't, like, what do you mean I killed somebody? Like, that's just sounded so crazy to me. And that was when it starts unfolding.
Amika had a broken pelvis, a lacerated liver, and a punctured lung. From the hospital, after multiple surgeries, she was led into a sheriff's van and taken to the Orange County Jail.
And, the deputies just kind of tossed me around. I was pushed into the shower, and so fell to my knees because I couldn't stand. I remember the shower coming on. I had chunks of glass still stuck in my scalp, and as I was showering, those chunks were coming out in my hand. So that moment of showering was also this like intense, I was realizing all of it moment by moment.
She was put into an isolation cell.
And isolation, it was room 13. I won't forget that. The wing I was in, I could hear people screaming through the vents. My body was just in so much pain that it was, on a thin mat, curled up with my wool blanket and just shivering.
Over the next days and weeks in the Orange County Jail, she was moved into a medical unit to recover from the accident and the surgeries. And from there, she was moved to a 2-person cell. She was allowed into a day room for 2 hours, where she could read the newspaper and shower, and then she was returned to her small cell. Eventually, she was given a public defender and told more details about the case against her. She could be convicted of second-degree murder. She waited in the county jail month after month. The only way she could have seen her kids would have been in a visiting room separated by a thick glass window.
I couldn't imagine looking at my little 6-year-old that was already could not make sense of where I was or why her mom was sitting in a box like that. And then I would envision her trying to touch me or, no, that was not going to happen. It felt more harmful. I would be harming them more.
Than not seeing them?
Than not seeing them.
She wrote letters home to her kids. This one was after she'd been locked up for 6 months, waiting for her trial.
There was one, this one was when I got sentenced. That was intense to read. Yeah, it's, this is to all 3 of them. So as far as I go, I pled guilty to the charges against me last Friday. I could have kept fighting them, but it felt like it was the right choice. Now there's what's called an open sentence. The judge gets to decide how much time to give me. The most time that I would do is 13 years and 8 months. With good time credit, it's actually just over 10 years. And that's the worst case scenario. He could choose to give me less time. He chooses that on May 8th. That's the day I'm sentenced. It's a big day, and it won't be a lot clearer after that what the future holds for us. But either way, I'll be going to state prison, which is a whole different ballpark than county jail. And then at the end of the summer, you guys should be able to come and visit for a weekend trip. I can't wait to hug all 3 of you. That sounds like heaven to me. So for that reason alone, I'm excited that I get to go to prison. Anyway, that's the scoop. May 8th is the big day. I love you so much.
On May 8th, she was led to the courthouse one final time for her sentencing.
Right after the break, Fire Escape continues. Stay tuned. Snap Judgment is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Welcome back to Snap Judgment. You're listening to episode 1 of Fire Escape, produced in partnership with Wondery. And when last we left, Amika was sitting in the courthouse, about to receive her sentence.
During the sentencing in Orange County, I was shackled and sitting in a cage off to the side of the judge. And so I could see his family. I could see my family.
And, but it was through a glass panel and bars.
We won't be using the victim's name in this story to protect his identity.
His wife was in the courtroom, and I remember them talking about, you know, who he was. He was a pilot and flew in the Air Force here. So he'd done all this amazing stuff in his life. And sorry. I remember his wife, you know, saying that he was just about to retire and that they were going to have, that she was so excited to have some time with her husband because he worked so hard his whole life. He was like a grandfather, a father. And I could relate to that, you know, like he had done his life, he put in his dues, he daily grind, day in, day out, taking care of his family, and he was just about to reap those rewards, you know. I had taken their whole life from them, basically. And so that sitting in the courtroom, it was like I took their life and my you know, and I did the same to my family. It was like I wiped out 2 families completely. So it was a really f***ed up feeling. I knew that sentencing was about what I was going to walk away with, but I knew that that was their opportunity to address me. And so that was the most important piece of that, was allowing them to address me and make sure I looked them in the eye, because I didn't want them to feel like I wasn't hearing them or taking what they were saying. I don't think they wanted to look at me much. You know, they shook their head in disgust, often like didn't really want to look at me. But I felt like I owed it to them. Maybe I don't know if that was the right thing to do. Yeah, I think I addressed the court at some point too. And then that is like, what do you even say? What do you say? Because it feels like at that point it's some performance. Like you're supposed to say something that sounds like this, and like none of it is even, it's like, I don't even know. So I don't remember what I said.
Amika's words to the court that day were this: I've never had the chance to express how sorry I am to Mr. family. No words will heal your hurt and bring back your father and your grandfather. But from the deepest part of my soul, I am so very sorry.
At that point, I was hated, and they were disgusted by me. And so that there was no room for me to think about that either.
To think about what?
To think about any making of amends that I could do with the family, or reaching. I remember like asking my attorney at one point, like, can I reach out to them? And he was like, absolutely not.
Amika waited for her sentence in the Orange County Jail. She talked to her God. She talked to her kids on the phone, told them she didn't know when she'd be home. She'd talked to her victim. So what would you say?
I would thank him, you know, for a chance, another shot. I still haven't talked about this. I felt very grateful to be alive, and I feel like I don't know, like I felt like I was allowed to live at the sake of his life.
Amika was convicted of vehicular manslaughter. She was sentenced to 9 years and 8 months in California State Prison.
The thing that always will stick with me is the judge just talking about, you know, letting me know that this was not about rehabilitation. This was about punishment. It wasn't like there was no hope, but kind of like that. Like, it felt like there was a message in there that I was not redeemable.
Coming back from sentencing, I was walked through the jail, and when I was brought into my unit, there was about 32 other women that I'd been with for that last year. So I walked in, everybody was waiting to see what had happened. And I fell to my knees and I screamed, and 10 years.
And just 10 years, 10 years, 10 years.
This one, I have so much to say to each of you, but I can't put it all on paper now. I'm waiting for the prison bus. They come every Sunday to pick up the girls that are waiting to go to prison. So any Sunday now I could go. I'll have a new address and a new prisoner number. Every day now is a day closer to seeing you all. That's what keeps me going every day. I feel strong, and I know we will all be okay.
Amika began serving her 10-year sentence in the polka dot muumuu women are dressed in when they go over the wall.
Over the wall is what they call it, and it's just going over the wall to the main yard in prison.
The prison was over capacity. Some women were pregnant, some were living with HIV, some were in need of psych care or methadone, and people were triple bunked, some even housed in boiler rooms. Amika was walked to her dorm, shackled at the legs and the wrist and the waist, and handed a blanket and some clothes. One of the first things she did when she got there was she took a little paper envelope of pictures of her kids, Milo, Soleil, and Blossom. And she took a tube of toothpaste and put a little dot of toothpaste on the back of each picture and hung them up in her locker where she could see them all the time.
I could see their face. I'd see their faces. I could smell them. I could feel their skin and their hair. That's what I would miss,
Sometimes she would take the pictures out of her locker and lie on her bunk and just hold them.
On my bunk, head phoned up. There was a picture of my youngest. It was like a close-up shot of her face and just all her little freckles on her nose. And I would just, kiss that picture and stare at her little freckles.
She could finally have a contact visit. She'd been locked up for almost a year, and now that she was out of county jail and in state prison, she could visit them without a pane of glass in between them.
I knew I was really close to being able to see my kids and hold them and hug them and in person.
Amika's papa was going to bring the kids for a visit, all three of them. They'd been living with him at the time, and he booked a flight and packed their bags. And Amika thought she could hold on just a little bit longer and wait it out until she got that visit. But waiting it out was harder than she realized. What Amika didn't yet understand was that inside prison, there's an invisible and changing set of rules, predicated often on the whims of the guards.
In a month period of time, I managed to get 3 write-ups. And I didn't feel like I was acting out on the yard or acting crazy. It didn't feel that way.
A write-up is a punishment for breaking a rule. She said it was as if the COs were everywhere.
You can't just go be. You can't just be. It's always, they want something. No, you can't get your wash slot today because you looked at me funny. Or, no, you can't get your phone call today because you didn't flirt back. It's every green suit wasn't a human. He was part of this prison machine.
She calls them green cops because they wore green uniforms. She says there were a few in particular she knew to avoid.
There was one guy on the yard that was, one of those ones that he was not horrible, but he was just really a kind of by the book.
She knew him as the stickler. He had this graying hair, and he was older, in his mid-60s.
Don't engage at all. Just kind of look at you like a piece of wouldn't make eye contact when you walked by.
Amika tried to navigate around him, keeping her head low. She'd go to the mess hall and the law library. her work assignment, the yard, and back to her cell, but she kept getting in trouble everywhere. And every time she'd get written up, the punishments would escalate. And then one time, a few weeks in, she saw this thing happening in front of her, and she felt she had no choice but to get involved.
I was getting ready to go in the shower, so I had my shower shoes on and a muumuu. There was this old woman that was a porter.
Porter is one of the jobs for incarcerated women. A porter would clean up after people.
And she was very old, like probably 70-something, just very like old and frail, and it's like hard to even watch her work in prison. So she had taken my sidecar's towel from the shared showers.
And your sidecar is the person who sleeps in the bunk next to you.
And so, yeah, my sidecar flipped out and started cussing out this old woman, and I was like, what?
And that's when Amika and her sidecar got into a fight. A big fight.
Throwing punches in the day room was like the worst place you could fight because you're basically in front of the cop shop.
And it was after the fight died down in her cell that a cop, a prison guard, came to take Amika away.
Some cop came to the door and basically was like, roll it up. I was classified as a failure to program, and I ended up being, put in isolation.
She was given 40 days in solitary confinement. And as the green cop marched her across the yard towards the isolation unit, he casually mentioned, "There goes your contact visit with your kids. They can still come down to the prison, but no contact." He said she'd have to look at them through a glass window.
We had a date. We had a date on the calendar when they were coming, and it was like, every call, I get to see you, Mama. I get to see you in a few weeks. So we're all counting down. I asked the sergeant to please let me call my kids, or my papa. I had to call Papa and tell him that I couldn't visit.
Amika still felt it would do more harm than good to have her kids visit through a pane of glass. It had been 1.5 years. There would be no in-person visit. She wouldn't get to see her kids. They wouldn't be able to touch her or hug her.
I mean, there became a point when I realized that being the type of mom I wanted to be to my kids from the inside was impossible. So it was very much like this reckoning for me of who I was as a human being. I had gone inside as a mama, someone that had integrity, and now I had taken someone's life, and it was a new version of me that I had to figure out who I was now.
If she was ever going to be able to figure that out, she'd need to find some way over that wall.
I always wondered what it was like on that side, because we knew they lived right outside the gate, and so it's kind of this other world. It just is it's like, where are they? What are they doing? It just gave me this like picture of what it would look like, and I wanted it.
Fire Escape is a production of Snap Studios and Wondery. This series was created, written, and produced by me, Anna Sussman. And I want to thank Amika Mota for her help and generosity in sharing her story with us. For Snap Studios, our senior story editors are Mark Ristich and Nancy Lopez. Marissa Dodge is our director of production. Original music by Renzo Gorio and Doug Stewart. Doug Stewart also created our theme song. Sound design and engineering by Miles Lassie. For Wondery, our senior story editor is Phyllis Fletcher. Our development producer is Eliza Mills. Clare Chambers, Lauren Dee, and Mandy Gorenstein are our senior producers, and Sarah Mathis is our managing producer. Our executive producers for Snap Studios are Glenn Washington and Mark Ristich. Executive producers for Wondery are Marshall Lewy, Morgan Jones, George Lavender, and Jen Sargent.
Thank you, Amika Mota, for sharing your story, and thank you, Anna Sussman, for bringing it to us. You can follow Fire Escape on the Wondery app, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can listen to episodes early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. Now, after the break, I sit down with Anna for a behind-the-story deep dive into Fire Escape. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Snap Judgment, the Fire Escape episode. We're celebrating the release of Fire Escape, a brand new 10-part storytelling series from KQED's Snap Studios and Wondery that we cannot wait for you to hear. Anna Sussman, the producer of the series, is in the studio with me right now. Thank you so much for taking us into this story.
Thanks, Glenn. I can't believe that I'm here talking to you about this. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
We are so thrilled to have you, Anna. This is a story you've been working on forever, for years, a story of the heart. Why did you want to dive into this particular narrative?
I have been reporting on this firehouse at the Central California Women's Facility for about 20 years, and I think that the work that they do is unlike any other story in the world, honestly. To be an incarcerated person and going into the community as a hero, as a first responder, and interfacing with folks as their lives are on the line, and then coming back into prison, I think is a story I could live in forever. And it's also a little personal to me. I have incarceration in my family, and I'm always interested in stories about what incarceration does to people.
The story is through the eyes of Amika Mota, who takes us with her over 10 episodes into a lot of different places. They're self-reflective in a way that most people recoil from. Why did she want to tell you this story? Why did she want to take away the veil?
Well, I think she's somebody who's been labeled a lot of things throughout her life, and I think she really knew the value of breaking out of those boxes, both for herself and for folks listening to her story, and that she knows she's never all one thing, and none of us are ever all one thing, but that's what makes a story compelling, and that's what makes our lives compelling, is that we are complicated and dimensioned and not what you think we are. And she knows that. Yeah, and I think she trusts that, and that the listener can hold multiple things about a person in their mind at once, which is a scary thing to trust. Because that is a lot of trust.
She is trusting you, and I appreciate how Amika allows us to see her at her very worst moment. She allows us to see her warts. She allows us to hear her laugh.
Yeah.
Do you think that the world that we live in does not accept witnessing joy from someone who's made a mistake of this magnitude?
Yes, myself included. I did have to catch within myself some beliefs I had about how much joy she was entitled to. Absolutely.
Wow. Say more.
I mean, if somebody took the life of someone in your family,
yeah,
and you saw them, if you saw them experiencing joy too soon, you could relate to that as being not okay, right? Hey, too soon. It feels like you're not taking it seriously enough. It feels like you're not in your pain enough. I think that's a very normal reaction. But at what point do we allow people to reemerge as humans and the full spectrum of humans, including joy and giggling and being silly and making more mistakes and all of the things that humans are allowed to be? And I think the thing that really clicked for me was when she says, I'm no good to my victim's family if I have to stay in my pain forever. I'm no good to anybody, right? Like, what good is that human who just has to stay in a place of shame forever, right? So if I want people who've hurt people to stop doing that, which I do, then I have to allow them to be full.
What's your North Star? What are you looking for when you're building this narrative?
The point to me that I had to keep in mind was not how does Amika reconcile herself with her crime. It's how do we as listeners reconcile ourselves to the idea that she is fallible like us. And we had to just confront that all the way through the making of the story. You know, there's a thing about likable characters, right? You need your characters to be likable. Otherwise, people tune out, right? They turn against the story. But she's a human, and humans aren't always likable, right? We're terribly unlikable a lot of the time, and she's a human who's taken a life. So then does that mean that we have to treat her differently in the details that we give and the choices that she makes and what we show and what we don't show? What
changed you while making this series? What changed about you while making this series?
Did you see me change at all?
Yeah, I think so. You became more deliberate. It made you focus on the joy of having your daughters and being able to parent your daughters in a way that you know that Amika couldn't. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair. You know, there's lots of ways in which her story terrified me. A lot of the women I interviewed were in for DUI. Those that weren't were all eventually in for things that you know could happen to anybody, given the wrong circumstances. And so, yeah, the idea of being taken away from my children, it terrified me. And the idea of my children, you know, making a terrible mistake later in their life terrifies me. And so, yeah, I think that the fragility of life is a huge part of the series. And it was something I lived with very intimately during the whole making of it.
We kind of got out a little bit, but how do you feel altered after having devoted this much of your life to telling a story?
One of the kind of concerns we had about the story was the fact that her crime was a DUI. And so it had this kind of pall of accident instead of intentionality over it, and that people might think, well, she's not like other people who committed more premeditated or more overtly violent crimes. And she says, no, I am the same. I'm exactly the same, because I know that all of those crimes happened in a moment of weakness. And I had to ask myself, do I ever lose my temper? Yes, I lose my temper. I lose my temper, right? And I tell myself I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to lose my temper again. So I think when she said that she's not any different, and that she understands that all of those crimes happened in a moment when people lost it, that made me rethink my mercy for all the crimes.
Okay. Very interesting. And what Amika said in the story we just heard was that this was not about rehabilitation. This was about punishment. That's what she heard. And I think that that's where a lot of people are. I think immediately after something like that, that's where I would be.
But that's fair. That's why we have a system of justice and not a system of vigilantism, right? Of course you want to go out and punch somebody out. Like, of course you do. But this is why this is in place instead, because it's supposed to be more measured.
Do you think that justice was served?
I think that because of the person she is, including the amazing mother that she had and the community that she had, Amika was able to come through her experience of incarceration as a fuller human being than she was before she committed her crime. But I don't think that our system of justice generally does that to folks. I think it does more harm to everybody.
What was the best part? What's your favorite part of the series?
When I was in high school, I used to watch this reality TV show called Rescue 911.
Yeah.
Do you remember that show?
I totally remember Rescue 911. Yes.
I loved that show. because I think there's something about being in someone in their moment of real need, real vulnerability, right? Like somebody, even if they've fallen on their dining room floor and they can't get up for 2 days and the ambulance comes to get them, or their house has burned down and everything in it. There's something that and it just, those moments make people so raw and so human and so vulnerable and so all the things that to be with them in those moments, I find really alive.
Intense,
right? Like that.
Revelatory. You see the real person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I like being in those moments.
Anna Sussman, thank you so much. You can hear the rest of Amika Mota's journey through the California incarceration system on Fire Escape, the 10-part series from Wondery and KQED's Snap Studios. Anna, we appreciate you.
Glynn, I appreciate you believing in this project and everybody at Snap Judgment for all of the work that they put into it. It's really been an amazing team effort. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Anna Sussman. Thank you, Amika Mota. You can follow Fire Escape on the Wondery app, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, if you missed even a moment, know that the Snap Judgment Storytelling Podcast awaits your ears each and every week. Or Walk the Shadow with our Evil Twin podcast Spooked, or dive into amazing tales from the African continent with Mind Your Own with Lupita Nyong'o, storytelling with hearts, storytelling with soul. All available wherever you get your podcast. KQED in San Francisco is Snap's orbiting Hall of Justice, and this is not the news. No ways it's the news. In fact, you could spend the rest of your days counting the ways this is even better than the news, and you would still not be as far away from the news as this is. But this is PRX.